Welcome to Not Your Ordinary Parts, a podcast where we talk about hard things associated with the human experience with the goal of increasing awareness, growth, and healing. You may hear information from professionally licensed therapists, life coaches, healers, doctors, etc. This information is not medical advice or therapy and is not meant to replace actual therapy or instructions given by a doctor or a personal therapist. I'm your host, Jalon Johnson. My guest today is Whitney Goodman. Whitney is a licensed marriage and family therapist, best-selling author, and a leading voice in mental health advocacy. Whitney is widely recognized for her refreshing, no-nonsense approach to emotional well-being, helping people move beyond toxic positivity and embrace the full spectrum of their emotions. She earned her master's degree in counseling psychology from the University of Miami, where she developed a strong foundation in clinical mental health and relationship therapy. And she's the founder of Collaborative Counseling Center, a private practice dedicated to helping individuals and couples navigate life challenges with honesty and self compassion. With years of experience in therapy, research, and mental health education, Whitney has become a sought after expert in emotional wellness, relationship dynamics, and the impact of societal pressures on mental health. Her work is deeply influenced by evidence based practices, neuroscience, and her own personal experiences, making her insights both practical and relatable. Her best selling book, Toxic Positivity, challenges the modern obsession with constantly being positive and highlights the importance of embracing all emotions, even the uncomfortable ones. Through her writing and speaking engagements, also her widely followed social media presence, she provides accessible, research backed strategies for mental and emotional well being. Beyond her clinical practice and writing, Whitney has been featured in the New York Times, Psychology Today, Good Morning America, and dozens of other media outlets, where she shares her expertise on modern mental health challenges. Her mission is simple: to help people feel seen, heard, and supported without the pressure to be anything other than human. So, Whitney, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for being my guest.
Thank you so much for having me.
I gave a bit of an introduction, but so that the audience can get to know you a little bit better, can you give us a little bit of background about yourself and how you got to who and where you are today?
Yeah, totally. So, like you said, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I've been doing this for about a decade now. Um, and my primary focus now is really on adult family relationships. I founded Calling Home, which is an online community for adult family relationships. And I mostly just run groups there now to help people with estrangement from parents, family, and other difficult adult family relationship dynamics. I am also a mother of two, and all of that keeps me pretty filled up.
Well, before you became this amazing therapist and author and all the things, who were you? Can you take us back a little bit to your early years and talk a little bit about how you saw emotions and mental health?
Yeah, I think I've always been one of those people that felt things very deeply. I remember being a really sensitive kid, being very aware of everything that was going on around me, or like I always felt like I could feel people's moods, I guess. I've also always loved to talk. I think my middle school yearbook thing was like most likely to host a talk show. Like I just was always getting kicked out of classes for talking too much, things like that. So I knew I was going to end up somewhere where I could just talk constantly.
That's cool. What was
Yeah.
your family system like growing up?
I have two siblings. I'm the oldest. So I definitely think I carry some of that oldest child stuff of, always wanting to be like the fixer or the one in charge.
Mhm.
I have a very, very large extended family that I grew up around in Florida and that were very involved in my life. And I feel very grateful for that. And, they still are today, which is wonderful.
Were emotions encouraged in the environment that you grew up in, or were you kind of, told to just kind of look at the bright side like a lot of people?
I don't really think they were, and I think that had a lot to do with, my parents' upbringing. My mom is a first generation American. There's a lot of, immigrant culture there of like just pull yourself up by your bootstraps,
Mhm.
like get it together, get things done. And I have such an understanding now for why they were that way. And I think that most people who grow up with parents or family members who are that way, you can probably see this undercurrent of like, they had to be that way. And now the world is so, so different, right? Things have changed
Mhm.
even over the last 10 years that we're so much more aware of how our emotions can hold us back and harm us that I've even seen such a tremendous change like within my own family around that culture. I think just through my work, even through me talking about it and it becoming part of our family.
Mm. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Do you have any memories that stick out in particular from childhood? Like, what's one memory that you think about now and it still makes you smile?
Mm. You know, I always loved birthday parties as a kid. I think celebrations were really important to my family and like making the best out of every milestone. And that's something I'm trying to carry forward into my own kids' lives now. And I think back of like planning that stuff with my mom or having her, I think really listen to what I wanted and follow through on that, that was so meaningful to me.
Mm. I think that a lot of people get into this line of work because of maybe their own struggles or their family struggles. Was there kind of a defining moment for you where you realized that you wanted to do this because of your lived experience?
I think that I get asked this question a lot, and I definitely feel like I'm in a unique position sometimes that my work does not totally mimic my lived experience. And I think
Mhm,
some of my lived experience as a person who was in therapy as a young kid, I had a lot of anxiety. I could feel a lot of things, and I remember wanting to create that experience for other people is defining for me. I can remember the first time I had a panic attack and feeling like so scared and overwhelmed by that. And I think at the time, no one really knew how to help me with that. But as far as my work now, I'm not estranged from my parents, and that is a huge part of my work. And I've found that the things that I've drifted into are not always fully represented in my personal life.
mm. When did you realize that you were well, looking back now, like, at what point can you pinpoint, like, when your anxiety started and maybe what was causing it? Because, I mean, to have panic attacks, that's pretty big.
Yeah, I remember the first time I had one very clearly. I was
Mhm,
probably like 12 or 13. Um, and I was having trouble sleeping at night. And I remember like feeling this sense of impending doom and just feeling overwhelmed. And I remember going to my mom and getting her up, and she didn't really, I think, know what it was at the time. It was like fear, like, are you having a heart attack or what's going on, especially if you don't know about anxiety or panic attacks. And I think around that stage of life, I had a lot of social anxiety. I felt often like excluded at school, or like people didn't like me, or I remember feeling very insecure at that point. I think also thinking about as a girl at that time in your life, you're going through so many hormonal changes and so many changes like that you can't see inside of your body, that I also think people weren't totally aware of or knowledgeable of at the time that I was going through that.
yeah, I agree with that. How did your mom or your family respond to your anxiety, being that you said culturally it was kinda, just pick yourself up by your bootstraps? Did you get the support that you needed, or was it kinda just
Yeah, I went to therapy. I do remember that, which I think was probably pretty big for them at the time, because that wasn't really something that was ever, at least that I'm aware of, really done in my family up to that point. And I do remember going, I remember seeing someone, I remember talking about it, but I feel like it was more of just a real lack of awareness and tools that was going on more than anything.
mm. Do you think around that time in your life when you were kinda going through the anxiety and having the hormonal changes, do you ever remember, like, a low point? Like, what was your lowest point that you can remember?
You know, I think I don't remember a specific bottom really to say. I
Mm,
just remember around that time in my life, and I think probably a lot of people remember feeling this way in those like early teenage years, is just feeling this deep sense that like people didn't like me. There was something like wrong. People were talking behind my back, like I was feeling excluded. Like I had a lot of those types of sensations, maybe not feeling good enough or understood. And that was like an undercurrent across many areas of my life that I couldn't really pinpoint a specific reason why I was feeling that way at the time.
mm. Did that kinda carry through, like, your education, like high school and college? Were you kind of still feeling that? Like, were you popular? Were you in the in crowd, or were you kind of someone who stuck to themselves?
So I think it's such the way I've always felt about myself is I think that I externally present a lot different than I would normally feel on the inside. Like
Mm,
when people ask me that question about high school, I'm like, okay, on the outside, like I was a cheerleader, I had a boyfriend, like I feel like externally, especially, when I was in high school, like early 2000s, that was like seen as, oh, you would assume, that I was popular and cool, but I felt so deeply insecure and like I was just on the edge of always being excluded. I did get bullied in high school, but in like weird ways. Um, I don't know. It was definitely a feeling that carried through for me like halfway through college. I think I felt a turning point once I found friends and more community that I felt secure with, I think.
mm. Are you the type of person who will go to a high school reunion, or you're not bothered with those types of things?
No, no, no. I have like 2 good friends from high school that I keep in touch with, and it's funny actually because my husband is friends with, like, everyone from high school still, and so when we moved, he's like, "Oh, where are all your friends from high school?" I'm like, "I don't know. I haven't talked to those people in, like, 20 years." Yeah.
When you started dating your husband, did any of your, I guess, anxiety or the feelings that you were feeling internally that you weren't showing the world, did they show up, and how'd that affect your relationship?
Mm. I think I did so much work on myself before I met my husband that I really can honestly say that I think marrying my husband is the biggest decision I ever made in my life and the best decision. I think it's been the foundation for everything that has come after that because I always knew I wanted my marriage to be like the easiest thing in my life. I didn't want it to be the thing that was always stressing me out and overwhelming me. And so I think I was about to graduate from my master's program when I met my husband. And I had been in therapy because of my master's program. Before that, I was reading all this stuff about relationships that I really feel like once I got there, I knew so much about who I was and what I wanted in life. And that helped me pick someone that was like not drama at all. Like there was
Mm,
no reason for me to have any doubts or those feelings because he was so secure.
mhm. How do you think that the way you were parented affects your parenting style, and do you see yourself maybe carrying anything over from your childhood at times?
Yeah, it's funny. It's like there's certain things from my childhood that I would like to carry forward. And then there's certain things that I'm like, oh, I didn't really like that, or maybe that wouldn't be good for this specific child. And I think that's my biggest struggle sometimes is thinking about um, not letting the pendulum swing too far on certain things and also not thinking that everything that felt maybe not great to me wouldn't possibly be okay for a different kind of child. That's like my biggest takeaway, I think, from my family of origin is my siblings and I could not be more different. It's like the three of us came from totally different families. It's bizarre. And in some ways, I credit that to my parents, like kind of letting us, like, we all went to different high schools. We all have I mean, they really let us like pick different paths to some degree. And so I look at that and I'm like, all right, we all have such different perceptions of our parents and of what felt good, what didn't that's been a big lesson for me is to not look at I have 2 sons, not look at them and say, "This is all bad, this is all good," but really try to learn from each child and what might be helpful to them. It's hard.
It is. And I think parents who, maybe grew up disempowered, when they have children, it's their first opportunity to feel a sense of control.
100%.
And, giving children their own autonomy can sometimes feel like a threat because their identity is tied to, how well they see themselves. So if you don't allow your child, or if you do allow your child to, run free and be themselves and be a butterfly, it kind of in a way can make a parent who didn't have a lot of stability and empowerment feel, threatened and off.
Absolutely, and I think that's a big thing in parenting, right, is I'm even noticing that for myself where there are things I would look at other people and be like, "Oh, I'm totally cool with that." But then I look at when it happens with my own child, it will bring up something in me where I'm like, "Oh, am I gonna let him do that? Is that okay?" And you have to kinda take a step back and be like, "Is this actually threatening or bad, or is that, like, my stuff that's coming up?"
Mm. How old are your boys now?
I have an almost 4-year-old and a 9-month-old.
When they're teenagers and maybe playing sports
Yeah.
and you overhear them talking to their friends, what would you hope you hear that they say about you?
Oh gosh, my biggest fear in life is that I raise men who are not respectful of women, and so
Mhm.
I would love, anything along the lines of, like, doesn't even need to be positive, can be neutral. I would like to see my sons be the people who feel like, um, you know, their mother was an equal in their marriage, that she had a say, that, she was strong, but also was able to care for them, and I think anything that falls into that category and that isn't, like, demeaning or dismissive would make me happy.
How do you think what you want to hear from them would compare to what you would have said about your mom at that time when you were their age?
My mom and I are living completely different lives, is what I will
Mm,
say. And I think that her marriage functioned differently than mine. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. And so that made me see her differently, I think, because there was certainly a power differential. And I think anyone that grows up in a family where one person is the provider and the other one is at home, and if there isn't equality in other ways, sometimes you can see those people differently. And I feel like that's where I've had to work through my own stuff is that am I swinging too far to the other side and being like, I need to be this super accomplished career woman when maybe that's not always what I want in every
mm.
season of life. And so I think I've had to work through some of those comparisons and also make sure that I'm not making choices um, just because of that.
I hear you. I mean, that's so difficult to try and find that sweet spot, especially when, you don't want to be too much of this or too much of that, but then also trying to achieve certain goals and things for yourself to be accomplished is important, right? But
Yeah,
then sometimes within that same desire to be driven or be accomplished, you can lose a little bit of the things that matter the most. And I think that balance is so hard to find.
it really is. Every day I'm working on it.
So where did you, I guess, become so or find your niche in toxic positivity? What was it that gave you the desire to really dig into this?
Mhm. I think I talk about in the book, like, I think culturally, it was a big part of my family culture. I think it was a big part of my community culture. It's a huge part of American culture. So I think that a lot of people can certainly trace back to at least one or two moments, multiple family members in their life that have utilized that type of thinking with them. I also noticed pretty early on as a therapist that positive thinking was being pushed on people like within the psychological community. And my own clients were coming in every day, at least one person was sitting down and using these phrases like, I know I should be grateful, but I know I need to be more positive, but like they're always adding these caveats before they complained about something. And I was like, gosh, how bizarre. Like you're doing this in therapy, the one place where you should be able to air some of these grievances. And when I was working particularly with people who had cancer and their family members or they had children with cancer, it was like constant, all the time. Like, how many times have you heard, like, you just need to have a good attitude and you'll beat it or whatever it is? That it became just so like glaring in my face that I started to write about it on Instagram. And that's really how this just spiraled from there.
For someone who is unfamiliar with your work or may not understand the concept of toxic positivity, can you define like what it means?
Yes. Toxic positivity is just the unrelenting pressure to be happy and positive no matter what the circumstances. And it's something that we do to other people. It's also something that we do to ourselves.
So when people say things like just be grateful or everything happens for a reason, and we start to like embrace that type of mindset, how damaging can that be?
I think that the context and the timing really matter, right? But if we're talking about we're saying that to someone who is going through a difficult time, they're presenting us with something hard. What's ultimately going to happen is that person's going to feel like you're shutting down the conversation, like you don't want to listen to them, you don't understand them, and they're probably not going to want to talk to you again, which I think is the biggest consequence here is that it ends up siloing people because every time I feel like you've shut me down, you don't understand me, you don't want to learn more about my situation, I'm just going to turn inward. And we're in a point in history right now where we're seeing, record high loneliness, suicidality, violence, all of these issues even among young people that that's very risky, in my opinion, to create relationships that feel like that.
Hmm. What could be some signs that someone is emotionally bypassing instead of truly supporting their partner or friends, especially as it pertains to toxic positivity in relationships?
Mhm. The 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 core of, like, all of these sayings that you've said is some of the really popular ones, like, "Everything happens for a reason," "Just think positive," is that they're dismissive and they shut the conversation down. So you can kind of do this check-in with yourself that if someone's venting to you and you say something like that, and they immediately just kind of are like, "Yeah, okay," or they just stop talking, it's a moment for you to be like, "Ooh, what did I just do there?" Because you want to approach it the opposite would be with curiosity, right? And understanding and validation, which is typically going to open the doors for the person to talk to you more and engage in more of that supportive dialogue.
Hmm. Thank you for that. Religion and spirituality often encourage faith and optimism, but there can sometimes um, be done in a form where toxic positivity is on display, and that can be called spiritual bypassing. Because people use religion and spiritual beliefs to dismiss real emotions, avoid accountability, or suppress pain. How do you see this showing up in conversations around mental health? And how can people engage with their faith in a way that supports emotional honesty rather than suppressing it?
Yeah. So the biggest thing for me here is that before you engage in any of this type of stuff, you need to make sure if you're doing it with another person that they share your beliefs. Because when you say to someone, "Oh, just give it to God. God's got you. Everything happens for a reason. Just pray about it." And they're not religious, it's 0% helpful. And it also just shows that you don't understand them or you're just giving them what's helpful for you. So I think that's like the foundation there. Now, if you're talking to yourself, it's important to allow yourself to actually feel the feeling. So, like, it manifesting in your body, you labeling it, understanding what you're going through before you start using some of that stuff. And prayer and going to religious services and talking to religious leaders can all be forms of attempting and processing a feeling, right? There's nothing wrong with that. It's when you use those things to shut yourself down, like, I shouldn't worry about this because God's going to take care of it. It can have the same type of feeling internally of like, I need to push this feeling down.
Mm. That can be very complex too, because especially if there's like a religious heritage in your family and you've been around your grandmother or your parents saying, "Don't worry, just do this, and do it this way, and everything will be okay."
Yeah.
And you want to listen to them and be respectful, but also that you're doing it and things are still not okay. Like, what are some small steps that people can do, I guess, to kind of get out of that pattern and see it for really what it is?
Yeah. I think when people say those things, especially when we're talking about older generations, it's often coming from a place of like, this was my only resource and way of dealing with those things, right? Was prayer, etc. But younger people can kind of look now and say, well, no, now we have a lot of other resources that we know work. And so I need to give myself permission to maybe like step out of that. And we know that there are major risks to certain mental health conditions going untreated for a long period of time. They're typically only going to get worse. So I think in those moments when you realize, hey, these coping skills that have been passed down in my family for generations are not working for me, I might want to start trying something different, whether that's talking to a friend, going online and looking at what my options are, following some therapists on Instagram, journaling, going to therapy. But can I use what I know as a complement to these new things that we also know work?
What if someone decides that they want to do things differently and they start to get pushback because now they're being disrespectful or those type of things?
Yeah, that's very common, and I think that you should expect a little bit of pushback, maybe especially in families where there's deeply entrenched beliefs, and that's where it's very hard as adults to say, I'm allowed to make my own choices. I can do this on my own. And I think framing it in a lens of like, I am not disrespecting you or rejecting you. I'm just trying something else for me. And I appreciate that that is what has worked for you. And I'll let you know, like, if I need more feedback or more advice. And obviously, there are some people that are not going to take that well.
You mentioned that you share these types of suggestions and comments and topics on your social media, which has gotten really big. What type of feedback do you get from followers or other individuals?
It's so funny. The first time I made a post about toxic positivity, the amount of like backlash that I got for that was crazy. It's actually wild how over the last, I think my book's been out for like 3 years now. These years, how much people have shifted to where now everyone's like, oh yeah, that's not good. But there was a time where if you said to people, it's kind of rude to say just be grateful, they would literally want to chew your head off. It's wild.
Wow. Um, I think there's also been a huge rise in like therapy talk on social media where there's terms like narcissism, trauma bonding, gaslighting, things like that. And they can often get misused. What are your thoughts on these trends?
Mhm. Totally. They can get misused, exaggerated, overblown. I think that ultimately, on balance, it's been a positive thing for people to learn about this stuff. The knowledge already existed. It was just being brought, to social media where it could reach a larger audience. That being said, I do think that licensed clinicians have a responsibility to present information in a way that is truthful and accurate and backed by science. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people sharing this information who maybe aren't clinicians or who don't have the extensive background to be sharing it in a way that provides all the context.
Mm, I agree with that. Um, you've worked with so many people, and I'm sure you've seen tons of different mental health struggles. What's one of the biggest things you've learned about people through your work?
I really think that everybody wants to have a close relationship with their family, and not everyone is able to do that for a variety of reasons. And this is another topic that kind of feels like toxic positivity when I started taking on that topic. And I think that's why I like it so much, is that there's so much misinformation out there about what we should tolerate in the name of family. And
Mm,
what I've learned from this population is that they want those relationships. They want to be close, but they ultimately feel like there is so much harm being done that they can't. And I hope to help like dispel some of the misinformation around family estrangement and difficult family relationships.
Was that one of the reasons why you decided to write the book? And also, like, what was it like for you to write it?
Yeah, I love like taking on a topic that I feel like is misunderstood. I think that's really why I started even creating content on Instagram, was like just to help people with things that I think get a bad rap or don't make sense to people. And so that was ultimately what was fueling my desire to even start writing about toxic positivity. And then that turned into a book.
Mm. Let's say somebody listens to this episode and they pick up your book and they learn all these things, and now they have these tools, they feel empowered. And the first time they go try and talk to their family and maybe set a boundary or bring up something that is unhealthy, and they get shut down, and now they're just feeling miserable, like there's no way out. Like, what would you want to say to that person?
Being the person to break a cycle in your family is extremely difficult. And you have to remember that you're probably coming up against maybe even hundreds of years of programming in your family.
Mm,
You're coming up against generational trauma, cycles of abuse, ways of communicating, and you are not going to fix that or change that with like a couple of boundary scripts that you practiced in therapy or in a book. And I think people feel like they're failing if
mhm,
they can't do that. And I have so rarely seen that actually happen. When you decide to take that on and say, I want to do something different in my family, it is really a lifelong endeavor of trying to operate differently within your family. And the truth is, some people are not going to get on board for a
mhm.
variety of reasons, and that's okay.
I think growing and letting go of the parts of ourselves that we felt like we had to be and had to hold on so tightly to have that connection with our family, and then getting to a point where we see that that connection may be harmful. Right in that space is so difficult because, like, a part of you has to die, or you may have to go no contact, or you may, not, maybe not no contact, but less contact. And that is so hard. Like, how do you help people in that stage?
Hmm. It is, it, that's one of the most painful experiences I think that I've witnessed as a therapist in the last decade, is someone realizing I've outgrown my family, or I have to be a certain way in order to be accepted by them. And I'm not willing to do that
Mm,
anymore. And I think that that can happen in so many areas, whether we're talking about sexuality, religion, who you marry. People get rejected by their families for a variety of reasons. And when you come to that crossroads of like, I either keep pretending or I have to leave this, it is one of the most painful separations, and I don't think anyone should ever downplay that feeling or expect for it not to happen or exist. And it's awful that you're even in that position, right? Where you have to make that choice. And sometimes people have to choose, am I going to sacrifice myself or am I going to walk away from this?
mm. I think tackling this type of subject, especially because of how much conflict and pushback can arise from it, was a huge feat. And you're definitely a trailblazer.
Thank you.
And what I want to ask you is, What do you hope your work leaves behind? Like, if people had to take one thing away from what you shared, what would you want that to be?
Oh gosh, let me think. Let me make sure that I say exactly what I want to say there. You know, I think that I've gotten to a point in my career now where my goal is for everyone to feel like they are deserving and worthy of love and respect and kindness from the people that they decide to keep in their life,
Mhm,
whether that's their family members, their friends, their partners. And I hope that people start to hold others to a higher standard in life, including their family, and don't allow abuse, mistreatment, just in the name of that type of bond. And I hope that we also treat our family members as very important people in our lives, not as people who we can do whatever we want to them and they won't ever leave us.
mhm. I wanna build off that a little bit, and that's with all
Yeah.
the work that you're currently doing to help others, what is it you want people to know most?
About the work that I'm currently doing.
Or just in general, what do you want people to know most?
Yeah. Right now I'm working very hard on building out Calling Home, which is where we have our support groups. And I think that the reason I stopped working mainly with individuals or taking on new individuals is that I found that all of these adults, I wanted them to meet each other. And I thought that it would be so much more impactful if they could hear stories from other people and learn from each other than them sitting alone in a room with me. And so far that has proven to be correct, and it's just like incredible the connections that have been formed, the stories, the advice like that I get to witness multiple times a week in these groups. And so anyone that's listening to this that's having issues with their family relationships, I would want them to know like you are so much less alone than you think. And often what you see about people isn't the full story. And I just love that I've been able to even just provide the space for people to do that.
Mm, that was beautiful, thank you. Alright, last question. If you could use your platform to educate anyone who might be struggling with their mental or emotional health and might be uncertain of how or where to start, what would you say?
Start with believing yourself. I think that what you're feeling is legitimate and that you deserve to get help or care for it. I think that's the biggest barrier to people taking the next step. And the moment you say, like, okay, I know what I'm feeling, I'm allowed to feel this way, I'm allowed to do something about it, then you can take the next step, whether that's going to therapy, seeing a doctor, attending support groups. But before you can make that jump, I think you have to validate for yourself that there's something going on and that you're allowed to get help for it.
Mm, thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
Definitely wise words. Whitney, thank you so much for this. Thank you for agreeing to do this with me. Thank you for writing your book. Thank you for the content that you provide for others on social media. It's so helpful. And like I said, this is not an easy topic for the nervous system. Like, just thinking about doing the things that require people to have to step up and say, you know what, like, I don't agree with that, or maybe it can be this and maybe it can be that at the same time, to kind of fish out that toxic positivity. So I'm grateful for it, and I'm sure everyone else who's benefiting from it and learning about it is as well.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me.
If people want to find you online or on social media, where can they find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram at Sit with Wit, on TikTok at Whitney Goodman LMFT, and you can visit callinghome.co to learn more about Calling Home and our support groups.
Nice. And then your book.
Yes, my book, Toxic Positivity, can be purchased anywhere books are sold. And then I also have my podcast, which is the Calling Home podcast that you can listen to if you want more help with your adult family relationships.
Nice. All right. Well, again, thank you. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for who you are. Thank you for what you do. And thank you for how you do it.
Thank you so much.